Okay, so welcome back to this second video on electrically triggered calcium oscillations, where we're specifically looking at the sino-atrial node. So, basically, when you get this initial depolarization of the electrical potential difference across the membrane by the hyperpolarization activated and cyclic nucleotide gated channels, that causes the electrical potential difference across this membrane to rise to the threshold potential for these T-type voltage-gated calcium channels. The T-type voltage-gated calcium channels are now going to open, and they're going to allow calcium ions to move into the cell, because both the concentration and electrical gradients across this membrane favor movement of calcium into the cell. So you get a net movement of calcium into the cell. Calcium is a divalent cation. It has two positive charges. So you're going to overall move positive charge into the intracellular compartment. So you're going to raise the electrical potential of the intracellular compartment and reduce the electrical potential of the extracellular compartment. So that's overall going to mean that the electrical potential difference from the extracellular to the intracellular compartment, which is the electrical potential that you measure in the intracellular compartment minus the electrical potential that you measure in the extracellular compartment, is going to go up, because this one is getting higher because you're moving the calcium in, and this one is getting lower because you're moving the calcium out. So that's going to mean this overall becomes more positive. So what happens is that you get this rapid upstroke of the action potential, and it goes up to just around just above 0 millivolts, basically. So it goes just above 0. Okay, now what happens is these voltage-gated calcium channels are open really transiently. That's why they're called T-type. So they open very transiently and then close, basically. So they're going to stop letting calcium in. Now what's going to happen is that, similar to in the case of all other action potentials, you will have voltage-gated potassium channels in the membrane of your cardiomyocyte here from the sino-atrial node. And these voltage-gated potassium channels will also have been activated when the electrical potential difference across the membrane was depolarized. And they open, their opening kinetics is much slower than the opening kinetics of the voltage-gated calcium channel. So they open much, much more slowly. And basically they start opening, they finally manage to open just at about the point that the calcium channels are closing. So what are these channels going to do? Well, potassium is very high intracellularly and low extracellularly. The electrical potential difference across this membrane is now neutral, i.e. the electrical potential of the extracellular and intracellular compartments are the same. So the concentration gradient favors the movement of potassium out, and it's the only thing to consider. So you get movement of potassium out of this cell, basically. Potassium carries a positive charge, so you move positive charge out of the cell. You make the electrical potential of the extracellular compartment greater, and you reduce the electrical potential of the intracellular compartment by removing the positive charge from it. So this is going to become more negative, basically. So you repolarize the electrical potential difference across the membrane. Okay, so that is the action potential you observe in sino-atrial node tissue, basically. So this is the sino-atrial node action potential, or the pacemaker action potential, if you like. And I'll just denote action potential by AP. Right, okay, so this happens continuously, because now, look, we've got back to resting membrane potential. But what happens at resting membrane potential? The HCN channel becomes activated again. It's activated by the hyperpolarization of the membrane. So when you hyperpolarize the membrane, it becomes active again. So this entire cascade happens all over again, basically, like so. And it happens again after that, and again after that. So you get this continual action potential being generated, and that is how you make the heart beat, basically. You fire this action potential off continuously, and that determines your heart rate, basically, your heartbeat. Okay, so now, if we were to measure calcium concentration, that's one of these points. So let's say we're going to measure calcium at that point. Well, every time an action potential happens, the T-type calcium channels open, and they're letting calcium in. So what you're going to see is, if we plot calcium concentration against time, so here's time, here's calcium concentration, what you're going to see is that every time you get an action potential, the calcium concentration goes up, and then afterwards it goes down. So after the T-type calcium channel is closed, it goes down because there will be two membrane proteins whose job it is basically to extrude calcium. One of these is known as the plasma membrane associated calcium ATPase. Can I fit all of this in? Plasma membrane associated calcium ATPase. Associated calcium ATPase. And basically, this is an active transporter of calcium. So basically, it moves a single calcium ion out of the cell in exchange for basically the hydrolysis of ATP. So it takes in a single ATP molecule, hydrolyzes that to ADP, an inorganic phosphate, and with the energy that's released from the hydrolysis of the ATP, it uses that to pump the calcium out of the cell against its concentration gradient. And that channel is often abbreviated to the plasma membrane calcium ATPase, or the PMCA. Right, there is another important protein in the cell membrane which extrudes calcium, and this is the sodium-calcium exchanger. So this is sodium-calcium exchanger, which is often abbreviated to N for sodium, C for calcium, and then X for exchanger. So the sodium-calcium exchanger. Oh, is this visible? No. So NCX, basically. And this moves free sodium ions out of the cell in exchange for a single, it moves free sodium ions into the cell in exchange for a single calcium going out. So let me reverse the direction of those arrows. They should all be coming in, those free sodium ions. Okay, let me colour them in to make them even more obvious. Okay, so basically, in between action potentials, in between activations of the T-type voltage-gated calcium channel, these two extruders are going to be working, so they bring the calcium back down. But then what happens is another action potential happens. The T-type calcium channels bring the calcium in, and then the NCX and the PMCA bring it out again. And you continue this pattern, so you get calcium oscillations within the cytoplasm of the cell.